I had COVID-19, and I got a lot of messages from you guys saying that you all were praying for me and my family. It was much appreciated. I also got a lot of messages asking me to tell you guys what it was like and if it changed my perspective on this whole situation. Here's my story. On a Sunday evening, a couple hours before bedtime, I was feeling a little bit achier than normal. I work a blue-collar job and have played sports all my life, so I generally hurt every night when I go to bed. But this night, it was a little bit different. I fell asleep just fine, but at about 3 in the morning, I woke up with the cold sweats. I went to the bathroom and found a thermometer. I took my temperature and I had a fever of 102. I walked back into the bedroom and my wife had woken up. I told her that I had a fever and that I was going to sleep in the spare bedroom. A few minutes later, I messaged my partner on this channel, Dave Morrison, to let him know what was going on. We had only stopped working on a video about 12 hours before that, but the next day, he said he felt fine and he never got it. I went back to bed and woke up a couple hours later. I had a fever of 103.8. That's high for an adult. That can be quite dangerous. So I took some Tylenol and my fever broke a couple hours later. By that time, my body aches were pretty bad. A lot like the flu. I'd say it wasn't quite as bad as the last time I had the flu, but comparable. At 8 in the morning, I went to urgent care and got tested for COVID-19 and the flu. The doctor fought me on getting the flu test, but I was persistent. The flu test came back negative. The COVID test was positive. And there it was. I had the dreaded COVID-19, this disease that has killed millions of people around the world. Now, was I supposed to be scared? The only thing I was worried about was my wife and our unborn child. So that morning, my wife disinfected the entire house. She worked her butt off while I was locked up in the spare bedroom feeling pretty bad. The body aches were definitely the worst part of it for me. But it wasn't so bad. As a former Chicago Bulls fan, I was able to enjoy the documentary called The Last Dance. So for a couple days, my wife was bringing me everything I needed as I quarantined in her former office, now turned jail cell, watching movies on my phone. 2 days after the onset of my symptoms, my 2-year-old daughter came down with a fever, and that's when we figured we all had it. A day after that, my wife came down with symptoms too. She got tested, and it came back positive. My daughter only had a fever for a couple days, and that was it. My wife had a low-grade fever for several days. She was a little achy and had what seemed like a sinus infection, but it definitely hit me the worst. But once we realized we all had it, there was no more quarantining for me in the soon-to-be baby's room. We were now on lockdown together, which was a lot easier for everyone. We ordered groceries from a delivery app, and a couple of friends also brought us some things we needed. As far as medicine goes, the doctor only prescribed over-the-counter medication, Tylenol, ibuprofen, and Benadryl. About 5 days in, when I was starting to feel quite a bit better, I went into the kitchen to get a snack. I grabbed a handful of grapes and tossed one in my mouth, looked at my wife and said, "These grapes are terrible." She replied, "I think you're losing your sense of taste." And I did. For about 5 days, I completely lost my sense of taste and smell. I've heard people say that if you have a bad cold, you lose your sense of taste, but not like this. I didn't have a stuffy nose. I just couldn't taste or smell anything. It was pretty weird. A lot of food just ended up feeling like I was eating a wet napkin or something. Although, if something was very sweet or very salty or spicy, I could feel that, but I couldn't taste the flavor. Anyway, it passed and we're all fine now, and like most people who get it, it was not life-threatening. And I'm not minimizing it for the people who've had a harder time with it. People who are elderly or immunosuppressed are at a much higher risk than people like me who are averagely healthy at best. And like we've talked about on this channel from the beginning of this pandemic, those are the people that we should be trying to protect. Of course, the Biden administration, people who tell us we're science deniers, has nominated Rachel Levine for Assistant Secretary of Health. I'm not sure what Rachel's preferred pronoun is, but I'll take a stab at it. She was one of the people who sent COVID-positive patients into nursing homes during the first COVID outbreak in Pennsylvania. But she also took her mother out of a nursing home at the same time. That's the kind of leadership we have coming into the new administration. Like Governor Cuomo in New York, Levine pushed policies that killed vulnerable Americans, and she's being rewarded for it. That would only make sense if you wanted this pandemic to affect as many people as possible. Hard to think of any other reason to do that other than a political one, of course. We now know that testing has been overly sensitive, causing many false positive results. The CDC changed their guidelines on testing immediately after Biden took office. Could that possibly be a coincidence? Perhaps, but counting every death as a COVID death because the person had tested positive at the time of their death, even though they clearly died from something else, couldn't possibly make sense if you were trying to understand how serious this disease is. It only makes sense if you were trying to inflate the number of deaths that could be attributed to the novel coronavirus. Look, I'm not saying that this pandemic didn't kill people. It did, and it will continue to do so. And you can argue that if we didn't do the lockdowns, it could have been worse, but if you take into account all the other problems caused by the lockdowns, like suicides, financial ruin, and people not getting treatment for other medical issues, it's hard to see the upside to those lockdowns. And do you remember how we were demonized for being against the lockdowns? And now many Democrats are making the same argument that we were making back then. In his State of the State address, Governor Cuomo said that if we don't open up soon, there will be nothing left to open. Of course, he's not being demonized for stating the obvious, like we were. And his timing is a little suspicious, but whatever. We should have focused on protecting the vulnerable. Period. Destroying tens of thousands of businesses and counting a person who dies in a car wreck as a COVID death because you tested his dead body with an overly sensitive test could have only been for one reason. Democrats use COVID-19 as a political weapon. They used it to justify changing our voting laws illegally, and they used it to crush the economy. Having COVID hasn't changed my view on this pandemic. It's actually confirmed that what we've been saying here at Blue Collar Logic the whole time is right. And that's the simple truth. Thanks for watching. If you like this video, subscribe to our channel, and if you want to become a supporting member of Blue Collar Logic, click on the link in the description and give what you can.